Hello, Dr. Sears.
How are you?
We are well, but we are actually ready to ask you a few questions and ready to listen your answers because you're the worldwide known doctor for the diet. And omega-3, of course,
yes.
The food supplement, yes. Okay, doctor, let's start me to ask you a question. How did you enter into diet research? What inspired you, actually?
What inspired me was my family history, a family history of premature cardiovascular death. My father was an Olympic athlete. He died in his early 50s, as did his brothers of heart disease. They all died of heart disease, as did my grandfather. So I knew some 30 years ago that I carried the same genes they did that predisposed me to an early death from heart disease. I knew I couldn't change my genes, but I somehow could change their expression. And that led me to develop the Zone diet, not as a diet for weight loss, but as a diet that changed my genetic expression and therefore controlled my future.
You believe that hormones and the genes, yes, are playing the important role in gaining weight or being healthy?
There's no question. People who basically gain weight are genetically predisposed to, as like are people who basically develop diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and Alzheimer's. So for those people who have those genes, they're turned on by inflammation. Not the inflammation that hurts, but the inflammation that's below the perception of pain. And since there's no pain, you don't recognize it's there. And it builds up over years, if not decades, until there's enough in-organ damage we call diabetes or obesity or heart disease or Alzheimer's or cancer. So again, if you have that genetic predisposition, then you can't change those genes. If you have the genes to become overweight, you can't change them, but you can change their expression. You can turn them down. You can silence them, not by some drug, but by a diet that controls inflammation.
So I'm trying to understand, if a person is genetically predisposed to be overweight and obesity, so he can be healthy?
Of course.
Okay.
Well, one of our patients is the heaviest man in the world at 560 kilograms. No matter how fat you are, you cannot be as fat as Manuel Uribe in Monterrey, Mexico. And we met Manuel. We said, we think we know what your problem is. It's not that you're morally inferior. It's not that you're weak-willed. You're simply inflamed. He said, it can't be that simple. I said, it is. So we put them on the Zone diet, and within 3 days, he was no longer hungry. For the first time in his entire life, I'm free of hunger. Now, was it great motivation? No, we had just changed the levels of the hormones in his body, and that had basically now changed the response of the brain to hunger and satiety. And if you're not hungry, cutting back calories is pretty simple. Well, since that time, Manuel's lost about well over 200 kilograms of weight. He still has another 200, maybe 220 kilograms to go. But even at 400 kilograms, he's one of the healthiest men in Mexico. His blood cholesterol is perfect. His blood pressure is that of a teenager. His blood sugar is perfect. It's impossible to make him any more healthy. So there is a person, his genes were genetically predisposed him to gain weight very easily and make it difficult to lose. And yet by changing the expression of those genes, by reducing the inflammation in his body, by keeping his hormones in his own, we were able to change his future.
Yesterday on the press conference, you mentioned about some hormones that play a very important role in a diet.
A very long word, carcinoids. And these are the hormones that come from the fat in our diet. Yet these are the hormones that control inflammation. And if you can control these, then saying, I have the keys to the kingdom. I can cut the Gordian knot of chronic disease. But to control those hormones effectively, you have to treat your food like a drug. Be taking at the right dosage at the right time for the rest of your life. And people say, well, what's the payoff for me? The payoff is this, better health. The one thing in life that basically has, you can't buy is health. And once you lose it, you realize how valuable that is. And once you lose your health, it's very, very hard to regain it. So why do you want to keep your health? Because, you know, that is the key to living a longer and better life, and that's why you want to follow the zone diet for a lifetime. See, people think of the word diet as a short-term period of hunger and deprivation to try to fit into a swimsuit. But the actual root word of diet comes from the Greek, which means way of life. And therefore, the zone diet is a way of life. A way of life for what purpose? To keep your hormones in a zone, and by doing that, you can control the expression of your genes. A very, very powerful statement. No drug can do that, but your diet can. But you have to respect the diet and treat it with basically the care that basically, if that's your long-term goal, to maintain health.
Yes, I think this is the most important issue and very difficult to come and organize yourself and to really be concerned about your dieting and taking, as yesterday you have mentioned at the final part of your presentation about the phrase of Hippocrates.
Well, basically it's coming back to the beginnings of modern medicine when Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine, let medicine be your food. That was 2,500 years ago. Now we know what the old guy was talking about. He was talking about how the food we eat at every meal can affect our hormones. And those hormones, if we control them, keep them in a zone, we can now control inflammation. And if we can control inflammation, we can control the expression of our genes. That is what he was talking about. It's taken us 2,500 years to understand at the molecular biology level what the wisdom that was inherent in that statement.
But actually, thank you to you, because better late than never. So, no.
Always true, and especially why now? What we're seeing right now is a global explosion of obesity, a global explosion of type 2 diabetes. Why now? Because we've had globalization of food ingredients. There's no one evil villain we can point to, but a confluence of three different factors. The first one was an increased consumption of refined carbohydrates, because those are the basic ingredient of processed foods, because they're easy to work with. That will raise the hormone insulin. Now that's the hormone that makes you fat and keeps you fat. But that's not sufficient to increase this inflammation. For that you need something else, and these are vegetable oils, rich in omega-6 fatty acids, coming primarily from America. Now, when high levels of insulin mix with these omega-6 fatty acids, you cause inflammation. And we always had one last thing that could save us from that type of interaction, and that was adequate intakes